Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever it is, wherever you are, welcome to the Good Values podcast. My name is Simon, and this is the first audio-only podcast episode. Enjoy. Okay, so welcome to the episode. For those of you who are regular listeners, may have noticed that I ordinarily don't announce my name, but it occurred to me recently that when I listen to other podcasts, the hosts introduce themselves, and I am not. I'm not in the habit of doing that. Although I should be. I should anticipate new listeners to the channel and introduce myself in case people aren't familiar with the other content that I provide, or the channel name, or me as a personality. So, expect that for future episodes I will include the introduction of my name with the start of the podcast. So, what I'm going to do now is what some people refer to as housekeeping. Housekeeping as a term just means to clarify a few points before getting into the main bulk of the topic of this podcast episode. First thing of all, I should be talking about why audio only. This is something which I mentioned in the last episode, that I was considering doing audio-only episodes, and a lot of the podcasts which I consume are audio-only. I like the video aspect to them, but the way that I consume podcasts normally is that I will put it on and note the time, the length of the episode, and use that time to do a drawing or a painting or some work on the computer. I can imagine lots of people use podcasts that way. It's sort of like having the radio on in the background whilst you work. So hopefully this will be useful and people won't be disappointed that I haven't put the work into put in photographs or visuals or video. I am going to continue doing that, but the odd episode will be an audio-only podcast. It's just a bit of a test to see if it's something which people respond to positively or not. Now, I must mention that I really appreciate the feedback that I've had. I've had several comments and messages from people responding to me raising the question of making a podcast which is audio-only, for several reasons. First is the production that can take longer, and also to get guests who are a bit more shy being on camera, and also because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of podcasts are audio only, and I think that having something on which is over half an hour long can take up a lot of your time, and if it's only audio, then people can be productive during that time, whereas if it has video, you're more inclined to want to watch. But that's not always the case. I did have feedback from a friend of mine who I care about very much, and she told me that she listens to it whilst doing work and then glances up from time to time to see the references which are being mentioned if images are being shared. So that feedback was really welcome and valued. I really appreciated it. Also, I've done a bit of a different audio setup for this, which I wouldn't do if the cameras were on. I don't know if you've seen in people's recording studios how they have shaped foam on the walls to absorb the noise. And I don't know if this will work because this is a really low budget version of that, where I had shaped foam inside of a package that I bought earlier this year, and I've used the cardboard box that this foam was in as a sort of a frame to hold two different pieces of foam that I've positioned just behind the microphone. So I'm hoping that the audio quality will be somewhat clean and clear. But if not, I'll continue to make efforts to try and improve upon that. That's the first part of the housekeeping. The next part I should mention is this episode was intended to be, or was planned on being, the second part of my conversation with David Woodfall. The first part was 2 episodes ago. We discussed Britain and Ireland and his wildlife photography and environmental and conservation interests there. And the second half will be on his international photography and some storytelling, which is fantastic. I do have it all recorded and in my program. I've sourced a lot of photographs from him, and I am going to edit that together, and my intention is to have that uploaded for next Friday, a week today. So apologies if you were expecting that or looking forward to it. I have spoken to David and told him that there is the possibility that it will be next week as opposed to this week, and he's very understanding and supportive. I really appreciate how generous he is with his time and considerations. The next part of the housekeeping, I have 2 more points. I've bought a new camera with the help of a friend who recommended a specific camera that's not overly expensive and is still very high quality and built for my purposes that I need it for. I purchased it a few days ago. It arrived yesterday and I haven't unboxed it yet. This is because I've been working on another project, a collaboration with an artist who I'm going to be sharing our work next year, I believe. I'm going to start doing a vlog. I don't know if it's a daily vlog. It just has to be regular uploads. I had to Google vlog in case vlogging meant daily. And thankfully it just meant regular updates and uploads. And it will be very regular, but I'm going to try and capitalize on the landscape to provide a good visual storytelling aspect to the vlog. That's my intention. I have not tried it yet, so let's see how that works out. But I've been working on other aspects of that project which don't include video. It's more of the art production. So that's what I've been working on lately. I've filmed a little bit of it, but not too much. I'll be able to show it in a slideshow as well as just process in other stages and steps. So that's something which is part of the reason why I haven't unboxed my camera yet. I will probably do it this evening, but I've also been focusing on trying to consolidate certain videos that I have on hard drives backed up from a while ago that I need to have in the right place so that I can edit them together. That was taking up some time yesterday, and then another small portion of time aside from that, because it takes a while, just to add on to the footage that I was discussing is being put in the right place. It takes a while to locate and transfer those files to my new computer because they're on my old computer, which I don't connect to the internet because the operating system's out of date and I'm not updating it, so it stays offline. And I transfer those files onto my mobile, and then from my mobile over we transfer to my new computer. So it takes quite a while because it was, I don't know, probably 50 or so videos. And the other thing that took my time yesterday away from unboxing was making music, which I didn't actually make the music, but I'm sourcing samples. So this is the last point of the housekeeping, so I may as well transition onto this. The music production I discussed in the last episode is something which I'm wrestling with, the concept of making the music from the sample patches provided with the software that I use. Whereas I used to source samples from other places and incorporate those into the software with the sample patches to create a fuller sound. And I was trying to be ambitious and avoid external samples, but I need to start somewhere and try to gather some momentum. So my intention now is to source samples as I used to. When I say as I used to, when I was late teens, early 20s, I used to make music digitally, MIDI production, and work with groups, hip-hop groups and DJs. We would do live performance, and I would also MC. These days I'm not going to be MCing, but I will be making the music and sharing that in the videos. Now, part of me thinks that I made this commitment to myself a week or so ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, to update the music on my channel. And I didn't think about how long that takes. And it's part of the reason why my videos haven't been uploaded as frequently as they normally are. So I will continue to use the same music that I have been using for a while, because that composition I think is quite nice and works well for the tone of the channel. It's not the same music used for the introduction for this video, in case you are new to the channel. I have a little piece that I composed, which is, it's only short, but it has bits of movement in it, and that is something which works quite nicely for the channel. Whereas what I was trying to build up is more beat production, hip-hop instrumental, things which I used to make. And I'm going to try and do a bit of both, where part of it sounds like short pieces of music, like what I use for my art videos. Others will be beat production, so it will be more hip-hop, drums and bass and samples. And other parts will be more soundtrack and a little bit more soft and not quite as rhythmic necessarily, a bit more atmospheric, I suppose. And I have some of that produced already, and I'll be producing more, because I do feel as though that will accompany some of the visuals of the landscape quite well. So it'll possibly appear in the vlog next year. Okay, that's the housekeeping done. Now on to the main bulk of the conversation, which is talking about film. Now, there's lots of people on YouTube who produce content based on film, discussions on film, critiques, reviews, analysis, and people who are very, very good at what they do, and some people who are just really likable. So I watch a mixture of both. And what I'm trying to use film for in my future video series is I'd like to analyse what it is that interests me about film. So my preference is foreign film and art films, slow films. I can watch films which are, contain action, or can have violence, or can be quite gory, or can be horror. But ordinarily, I like watching slow films, where the character contemplates their situation or the situation of someone else, and you can feel what the character is going through without them having to communicate it verbally. I really value show don't tell as a principle in filmmaking or script writing. Show don't tell meaning that when a character is communicating something in the script that's only communicated for the audience's benefit as opposed to something which needs to be discussed between characters, I start to notice it. That's called exposition when they do that. It's moving the plot along through dialogue for the benefit of the audience. We have to get to the bridge by 10 o'clock or the bomb will explode. Things like that will only be useful for the audience, whereas the structure of that sentence will be a little bit more unnatural in the real world and can take certain audience members out of a film. So my preference is for a bit more weird cinema. It's not for everyone, but even if you don't like the same films that I do, I'm hoping that you will still appreciate the videos that I produce, because you don't need to like the films in order to appreciate what I'm introducing through my discussions, and I'm going to produce artwork to illustrate what it is that I find so captivating. There's a film reviewer called Chris Stuckman, and I really like him. I watch almost all of his videos, but I don't really like the films that he likes. I'll hardly ever watch a film that he recommends or agree with him on what he just talks about with his videos. But I just really like him. I really respect him. I think he's a very nice person. And it's similar with, there's someone called Pushing Up Roses. And I can't remember her real name, but that's her channel name. And she does videos on Murder, She Wrote, Angela Lansbury, and Goosebumps and things like that. You know, television which are a bit camp, a bit cheesy. And I've not watched many Murder, She Wrote. I've watched a few, but not enough to recognise any of the episodes she covers. But I was obsessed with her videos because I liked her and the way she spoke about them. And I think this is where there's an opportunity to cover film which I don't see covered in the same way that I'm intending to, without the necessity for the audience to agree or to share that interest with me. I don't think that's necessarily important. So that's my hope and my intention with the video series that I'm going to start producing. Now, I need to mention that a recent guest on the podcast, Gwen, she's from episode, I believe it would be 19. I'm pretty sure. I'll put a link either in the description or at this timestamp now, so that you can watch it in case you haven't. She very kindly gifted me a 3-month subscription to Mubi, M-U-B-I. This video is not sponsored by Mubi. I hope in the future to be sponsored by them, because I am very seriously considering buying a subscription myself, because I love that platform. It's filled with the type of cinema that I love, and it was so kind of her to gift that to me, and it was because we had a shared interest in the strange and unusual type of film that you don't often come across except for on late night showings on BBC Two or Channel 4 in the UK. I don't know what it is on television platforms in other countries. I haven't had a television for about a decade, so I don't know what's going on television these days. The point being, if you're in the UK, you know what type of film I mean. You find, the Japanese films late at night on Channel 4 or BBC Two, or some kind of British cinema that you just don't come across on the big platforms at the prime time slots. So I've always found those interesting, and not just because of that fact, but because I honestly find the films more engaging and intellectually stimulating than blockbuster films, which I've had a lower and lower tolerance for over the years. It's just my preference that's developed. It's just a difference of opinion. Now, saying that, I also want to discuss how the production aspect of these videos that I'm planning on making will be something which is a bit more challenging. I'm not only going to do video editing of the cinematography, parts of the action, potentially parts of the dialogue, but I'm not sure. It may not include the sound from the film unless it's really important. A lot of it is to do with the camera work and the blocking, which is where the characters stand, and I think you call where the scene is, how the scene is decorated, it's called mise en scène, I believe, which is how you fill the screen with furniture or objects, or how you make the environment dressed up in a certain way. So I'm going to be doing that part where I edit the footage that I'm discussing. I'm also going to be producing some art which will not be necessarily the same type which I've been doing in any of my other videos. My idea in my head, which I can't visually picture what I'm planning on doing, but I can weigh up the idea, and from what I can see, again, see is the wrong word, but what I can conceive of is that it will be a line work drawing and maybe a series of illustrations or diagrams with a single line weight and a line of action and arrows in different colours, things like that, maybe some computer graphics. That's my thought process at the moment, is to produce something which is going to be hopefully quite informative, and it may be, not quite as accurate as I intend it to be, but I will try as best I can to make the content be true, as well as filled with entertainment and visual cues to represent what I'm actually trying to say. So that might take a little bit longer, and it's part of the reason why I'm holding back making the video, because I do think that if I just start charging ahead now, making the video without really thinking about the different aspects that I want to be included in this series, it might not turn out as well from the start. And I'm trying to introduce a standard from the first episode to, say, the 20th or 30th episode, however many episodes I do of this series. Either way, I'm looking forward to doing it. I have a television series that I'm starting with, but there is definitely some film that I will introduce as well. And then the conversation surrounding cinema will be interesting to see how that works, because in truth I don't necessarily share the view of more power to you. That's an expression that I hear for people who completely disagree with others about film or television, and they'll say, hey, if you enjoy it, more power to you. And I always think, no, let's try to stop this lowbrow entertainment. I think it's dulling down the populace. It's dumbing down the populace, I should say. It's duller entertainment and dialogue, and it has an effect on people. Now, this isn't necessarily scientific. This is just my concept. It's not even a hypothesis. It's just an idea that I've had, so it might be completely false. But I do feel as though trashy television programs and bad filmmaking and really awful script writing and bad character development affect the viewers, the audience. They are influenced by this. Art imitates life, life imitates art. It's written into this repetitive, influential mirroring which occurs between the audience and the production. And I honestly believe that there has been a degradation in societal and community values due to this downward slope of quality. Again, if I'm being completely pompous, then I apologise when I'm proved wrong. I apologise if it seems offensive that I'm saying, if you like a film that I think is absolute rubbish, then I honestly think you're wrong. I know it's not a popular thing to say, but I've seen certain films which I think offer no value. I might name them in the future. There are some where I'm just absolutely gobsmacked. I'll tell you, okay, as an example, because I've watched one recently. I watched Godfather 1, Godfather 2 and Godfather 3 recently. And everyone knows the reputation of Godfather 3 is that it's not a good film. My memory of the film was, I didn't mind Sofia Coppola. I thought, she was as good as anyone else in the film. And my memory was that the attack during the parade was a copy, I suppose, of the parade in the second film, except the third film it didn't make sense because logistically it was far too complicated and chaotic in order to be a plan. It didn't really make sense with the different elements of what occurred during that parade in the third film. And otherwise I just thought it didn't really have the charm and the charisma of the other two films. Now, on rewatching the three films, the first and the second film did feel completely different than every other time I've watched them, and I've watched them so many times I've no idea how many, but it felt completely different. I felt as though I could see them a lot more clearly this time. I understood the names, the families, the motivations. I could see little bits of problems here and there with the first two, which I could never see before. I always thought they were completely immaculate, and this time I thought, oh, that's actually a little bit off. Absolute magic though, making the first film, especially if you know the struggle that Francis Ford Coppola had making the first film. It is lightning in a bottle, having something that strong come out of those struggles. The second film I think is absolutely masterful, from having this huge hit in 1970 to making the sequel in 1972 and having something work so well. Now, I believe it was 1990 by the time they made Godfather 3, and on this time I watched it, I was shocked because the film starts, the intro music is queued up at the beginning, and then there are stabbing chords that interrupt it. It's so strange that immediately the film was paused and I had to think, is this something else that's happening? Is something interrupting the film? Because this doesn't make sense. Even the music doesn't feel right. Parts of Al Pacino's performance feel terrible. The dialogue is so wooden. It's awful. There is a character, because in the first film there is a character called Tom Hagen, who's the consigliere for Vito Corleone, and because Tom Hagen, played by Robert Duvall, didn't feature in the third film as they wouldn't agree to his terms for the contract, they instead had his wife, who they called Mother Teresa Hagen. Now, you may not object to that, but I think, what are we talking about? What is happening here? This is a soap opera. This is insane. It doesn't feel like a Godfather film at all. It feels like satire. And then they have his son called Anthony Hagen. And they have Andy Garcia playing Vincent. I can't remember the surname now, but he ends up being Vincent Corleone, spoiler alert. And he plays the son of Santino, who died in the first film. Again, spoiler alert, I apologise, but Andy Garcia doesn't belong in the film. Neither do most of the other actors who aren't. I mean, no one does. Even Al Pacino's makeup in the first part of the film is awful. It looks like he's been dusted with flour. And then later in the film, when he's had a diabetic stroke, he looks younger afterwards. The things that happen in it don't make sense logistically. A lot of things. where they have rules and principles, and then when those are violated openly without any reason for it, any kind of transition or difference, they just don't seem to pay attention to that. I have no idea how it can go so off the rails. It's madness. So that's a film which, if people say, actually, this scene was really good, I just say, well, you are wrong. I'm sorry. It's not a difference of opinion. That is incorrect. I can show you demonstrably why it's not a good scene. That's my honest belief. I honestly believe that there is a right and a wrong for good and bad filmmaking. And that could be incorrect. And if it is, then I will learn that and I will retract it and apologise. But for the time being, I am adamant that that is demonstrable. You can show the quality of the first and second film, and you can show the absolute lack of effort and skill in the third film. It's well known, it's not controversial, but I did Google the reviews, the Google reviews after watching the film, and its defenders are mind-boggling. It's like defenders of certain political views, where it's just completely unreasonable. Anyway, that's what I mean. That's part of the discussion. So, moving on, as I said, there are lots and lots of people who make videos about film and about cinema. Some are really good, really highly skilled, and you can see why they are so successful. Others are really good for different reasons, like they are very knowledgeable and they can add a level of experience and intelligence that others don't have. For example, Adam Johnston, who does yourmoviesucks.org or YMS. He's a very talented musician. He's got a very good ear for when things aren't right in a film. Something's off. Some of the audio was redubbed and it's not the same recording, or there was a little pop, or there's a peak in the microphone and it was covered by music. Things like that I wouldn't pick up on because I'm just not that attentive. He picks up on, and I really admire that. I've already mentioned Chris Stuckman as being such a likeable person. He's just so wholesome and nice that I will always enjoy watching his videos, despite the fact that I will never watch his recommendations. Even films that I agree are great films, like the classic films, I don't know if we agree for the same reason. And I'm not interested in arguing with him, even though I just stated earlier that I believe there's a right and wrong. I'm not trying to take away someone's fun. I'm trying to introduce reasons and measurements behind why I think some cinema is much better than others. There are people like Every Frame a Painting, who I believe hasn't made videos for a good while now, several years. Nerdwriter1 is someone who I love watching. Really good video production. But I do believe that there is a place for what I am trying to introduce, where it won't be seen as an art video by anyone who doesn't know this channel. But for people who do know this channel, it shouldn't be seen as a diversion from art production, because I am producing artwork based on the topic of cinema and cinematography. So it should make sense. It's so influential to me that I think it will enrich the content and the different series that I'm going to try and produce. And to discuss the artwork, let me just share that I do make physical artwork. I'm not a digital artist, but I am aware of how to make things digitally, not as well as others. I certainly don't have the experience of others, but I'm going to try and utilize both. And my intention is to try to make it visually stimulating, to draw parts of the scene which you don't see, things which I can't show you because I don't have it. No one would have the vantage point that I'm going to try and offer to the audience, and it's going to do with the horizon line of the lens and the considerations of the points of action, the different frames and still images that you can get from one-shots. That's especially what I'm going to focus on, and not for famous one-shots, not like Birdman where the whole film's a one-shot, or Rope, which I love those films, they're both fantastic, but I'm talking about one-shots which they're framed really nicely, where the characters shift about on the screen, and if you were to pause it, you would see a starting point, a middle point, and an end. And I have the first one plotted out, but it's so simple. It's such a straight line where your main character has had a discussion with the antagonist, and the camera is following the antagonist, and then your main character follows from behind, and it's just a straight walk. The camera is looking back down a pathway at these two characters walking towards the camera, and you have the antagonist in the front and your main character, the protagonist, at the back, and then they meet at a certain point in the pathway. Beginning of the shot being opening the door, middle of the shot being the pursuit from the main character, where you can see them coming through the door after the antagonist who's already halfway up the pathway, and then the end of the shot being at the very end of the pathway, where there's an acknowledgement that the protagonist has posed a bit of a question or a problem for the antagonist, so that they know that there's something which they have to address. And it's just how that's communicated with one shot. And it's not a complicated shot, so it is the easiest one, and I'm contemplating whether to use that or not. I might make the first video that scene and another scene, just to make sure that it doesn't seem underwhelming as a concept. I think maybe the juxtaposition might help. My consideration is to use, because this is a television series, to use what happens is the television series goes downhill after a certain point, after a decade or so of its running time, of its production. It's so strong in its filmmaking qualities as a television show, and then after a certain point all of that disappears. The camera work isn't as good, your protagonist has all of a sudden lost a lot of his character, and all of the side characters don't seem to be interesting or well performed, and a lot of the sets don't appear to be well considered or dressed in an interesting way, where the colours or the mise-en-scène, for lack of a better explanation, is quite as sweet. So my initial idea was to compare and contrast the strongest, earliest parts from episode 1 to the weakest parts from the later episodes from some of the last seasons. I think that's more fair than to compare it to another television program which is made by completely different people, even though this program is probably made by completely different people at that point. It seems fair to compare it to itself. So I may do that. I don't know if I'm going to harp on that. That may just be one point of the video, and then to really try to emphasize the strengths. Anyway, this has been a long enough podcast as it is. Me talking about film is obviously something which I'm passionate about, but I'm going to be very careful with how I talk about it. Now, I've been quite open and made myself vulnerable by exposing the fact that I have such strong opinions about film, that I have a very unpopular opinion, which is there is a right and wrong answer to if films are good. That's probably incorrect. Even the greatest film directors living today are a lot more careful than what I'm being, and they have good reason to, but I'm also not trying to upset or offend people. I'm just trying to be honest, and there's no point in me trying to pull punches when in truth I do feel that a lot of cinema is pretty rubbish. And I say a lot of cinema, a lot of big successful cinema is pretty rubbish in my opinion. The cinematography I don't think is great, the acting, the dialogue, it's just big names, pretty people, which I don't dispute, and it has got a magnetism to it. But I don't find value in that. So that's why I'm trying to introduce things which I think are a lot more entertaining and artistic. So hopefully that will be entertaining. But that's it. This has been the first audio-only episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then please leave a like, comment at your thoughts and any ideas that you've had or responses to things that I've said down below in the comment section. Subscribe if you haven't already and ring the notification bell. Share this with any friends or family who you think might enjoy it. Thank you very much for watching or listening. I hope you've had a productive work session if that's how you've used this episode. And I will see you in the next episode.